Hi there, Mark here again, and welcome to part 3 of my build guide for the Tamiya CC-02 chassis. In part 2 we got to step 24, so hopefully we'll get to the end of the build. In this one, let's crack on with it. On to step 25 and the rear drive shafts. So again, match them up to the diagram. I've already prepared this one because they both go together in a similar fashion. I'll just show you on this one with the pin on it. There are 2 notches in the end of the drive shaft near the hole, and get your E-clip and put it in the first slot. Again, I'll just press down. Okay, once that's on, you've got plastic part C14 that goes on first. Put your bushing or bearing on, another C14, and that means now I'm going to have to use pliers to put this E-clip on in the groove right next to the hole in that shaft. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Then just pop the second bearing on the other side and we'll get that in the right place when we put it in its housing, which is part B3. That's this one, and you see I've dropped the differential in there with a bit of grease on it, and it's simply a case of getting your shafts again and poking them into that diff and getting your bearings lined up. So put a bit of grease on the end of that pin, pop it in, your bearing goes quite snug up against that diff there. Okay, so that's located, and then same with the other side. You can feel when it's gone all the way in, and again make sure your bearings are seated. There we go. On to the next step, which is step 27, the rear axle housing. So again, make sure that you line up your axle with the diagram. So we've got this part here where the output's going to the right and pointing backwards. Again, put your E-clip onto this short joint shaft, pop your bearing and bushing on the side with the hole in it. 12 tooth bevel gear goes on the side with a flat, and again that's a bit of a click to push it in, and then the little 850 bearing just sits on the end there. And as it shows, we're just going to drop that in, and that should mesh up with the diff. Just make sure it's turning okay. Yeah, transferring some grease across, that's cool. Then you've got 4 3mm nuts, and you've got to pop those in there, one on the other side, and make sure they are sitting into those housings correctly, with the should be the kind of pointed part sticking up, if you can see that. You've got another 2 on the other side, and as I said, if they're not sat in there correctly, the 2 halves of the axle won't join together properly. Anyway, now we can get part B4 and put the 2 halves together, hold everything in place. Yeah, make sure it all sits nice and square, and then we've got the 20mm self tapper goes in that hole there. Then we've got 6 12mm self tappers, and 1 in there, in that hole there next to the output drive, and then 1 in each of the holes right at the end of the assembly next to the drive shafts. There we go, get those done up, and that's step 27. In step 28 we're going to attach these housing pivots again, exactly as we did for the front axle, but first again you've got your 2 ball joints, MC12, 1 there and 1 there. Screw those in, look at the alignment again, and then strangely on this one we put those extra nuts inside, and you just screw this MC2, which is a 4x2 I think machine screw, and they go into those holes at the back. Don't do it up too tightly. I think they may be for some alternative shock mounts or something, I'm not sure. Anyway, they're blanked off with those screws. Anyway, let's get it back to the orientation as it was, and first we get C15, which is marked part A. Again, it goes on these inside holes here, 2 15mm screws. Again, self tappers. C16 part B, that goes on this side. So there you go, when those 2 brackets are on, we just turn it upside down, like so. And C18, part D, goes on that side, like that. And C17C goes on this side here, like so. Again, with the 15mm self tappers. Step 29 is attaching the rear arms, which are J7 and J6, and it's exactly the same as fitting them to the front. So I won't go through all of this, but again, you've got to put those parts C9 and pop them into each hole at the end of those arms. So the J7 sits at the top. You can see how it's orientated there. If we turn it over, you can see the rears are mounted like this. Again, note the orientation. And I've already popped ahead and done step 30, which is simply again the same as for the front, just fitting on the propeller shaft, which is held on by that grub screw. Okay, I hold my hands up, I made a mistake. I put this part here, which is C15, the A part, I'd put it on back to front, and luckily I noticed that mistake before we move on. So this is how the rear axle housing should look when it's finished. So in step 31 we're going to attach the front axle assembly onto the chassis, and the first thing we've got to do is, as you can see here, we've got to make sure that the prop shafts lined up correctly when we push them in together. So we'll just have a go at that. So hopefully you can see that matches the diagram, how I've got that connected together. And then we've got to get the arms attached to this bracket here and the same this bracket on the other side. So let's see if I can get the top arms. It's a bit fiddly, and we're using 4 3x15 machine screws for this. So we'll just get the screw started off and do it up tighter later. Say the lower arm then goes on to the other hole on that bracket, like that, and I'll do the same on the other side and get those screws done up and show you what it looks like. That's when a ratchet screwdriver really does come in handy, and as it says, do not over tighten these, because if you do these screws up too tight, you'll expand the ball joint in there, the plastic will just expand and your joints won't move. So this is what it looks like when it's finished. I hope you can see how it all goes together, and the next step is fitting the rear assembly as it shows in step 32 here. Exactly the same as we've just done. Connect your prop shaft up, put your 4 screws in. I'll just get that done off camera because, as I say, it's exactly the same, and I'll show you what it looks like. And here it is. This is what it looks like with the front and the rear axle assemblies all connected to the chassis. Okay, so we get to step 33, time to open parts bag D, and we're going to build up the dampers. So the dampers are constructed in parts 33, 34, and then finished off in 35 and 36, but I'm just going to do them all in one go. As you can see, I've already built 3 of them. They're all the same, and nice and smooth they are too. So I'll just quickly go through putting the last one together. First thing I do is I get a bit of grease. You can get some special damper grease, but shock grease or whatever, but I just use the Tamiya stuff. Just put a little bit in the bottom there of the shock. Then you've got these little O-rings to pop in, and that grease just seals them in place. Bit more grease. Pop your second O-ring on top of the first. Bit more grease, and then pop on the bottom cap. But the only couple of tips I've got here is don't do that up all the way until you've got the piston rod through, which is this thing. And make sure you do not forget to put in this part. It's a spacer, X11 plastic spacer. Make sure you put that over the shaft before you put it in. If you don't, your shock's going to be too long and it'll just fall apart. Okay, so just get that through the hole at the bottom, and then wipe the grease off the end there. You can screw on the bottom of the shock now, and there is a thread inside this part, so make sure you get it threaded correctly. Just hold the piston rod with some pliers and give it a nip up. Make sure you don't use serrated pliers, or you'll make a mess of that shaft. You can now do up that bottom part and then just fill it up with shock oil, and make sure you get all the bubbles out. The kit comes with 2 bottles of oil, and I found that the 1 bottle was enough to do 3 shocks, so you get a bit left over. Okay, when you've got all the bubbles out, make sure it's filled to the top with oil, and then get your red diaphragm, and you will get oil overspill. That's what you want. because that shows that it's full to the top and there's no air going to be trapped underneath that diaphragm. Just give that a wipe off, screw on the shock top, put your clip on the top of the spacer, which is an X7, pop on the spring, and then X5 just sits over that shock bottom like so, and it's as easy as that. Make 4. Fitting the shocks is a piece of cake. You just need a 3x20 machine screw and the little 3x6 spacer that goes into the top of the shocks, that spacer. Pop your machine screw through that, pop that screw through the top shock mount, and it's just a flange nut holds that all together, and then simply pop that bottom of the shock onto the ball connector, and yeah, there you go. It's the same for all the shocks, but the front ones are in the middle of the 3 holes in the top mount, and the rear ones it says to put in the front of the 3 holes in the top mount. So there you go. Step 37 is checking your RC equipment. Basically you need to plug all your electronics in, make sure your servo is connected to your receiver, and what we're going to do is we're going to centre up the servo. Make sure you do this. If you skip this step and it's not centred, then your car won't run straight. So as I said, plug it all in, turn it on, make sure your transmitter is set in the neutral position for steering, and just throw it from left to right a few times. Let go when it's centred and turn it all off again. All I've got to do now is make sure I don't disturb the splines there or the output from the servo, just leave it as it is, and I can disconnect all this again now. And as you can see, it does show here how to fit the high torque servo saver. I'm not going to fit that because I bought this 20 kilogram metal geared servo and it came with its own horn, servo horn, which is aluminium, so I'm going to use that. But obviously if you want to, you can use the one that's supplied with the kit. All we've got to do is look at this bit here, make sure we've got the orientation correct, and the servo needs to be at 90 degrees. Sorry, the servo saver needs to be at 90 degrees, or the servo horn, as you can see there. So I'll just get this connected up by fitting the screws in place, and it's on to step 38. Not forgetting, of course, to fit the 6mm ball connector, which is attaching the servo, and also these plastic parts C2. So as you can see, you slide the servo in horizontally if you've got it mounted like I've got this one mounted. So we just push it into there, and then you've got just 2 of these flange nuts that will hold it on, and those 2 screws go into the bottom of the 2 holes on each side. It should look something like that when you've done it. Just pop on your ball connector, and as I said before, this is going to hit that servo horn, but there's nothing we can do about that unless you mount the servo the other way, as it shows here. But if you do that, you get bumps here, so I've gone for what I think is the lesser of 2 evils. And then it's a C2, 1 on each side, and it's secure with the 18mm long self-tapping screws in those positions there. Steps 39 and 40 show fitting the electronics. Basically you stick it all down with double-sided tape, and they've got this box here which is F1 and F2 that you can put your receiver into. Step 40 here shows how to route the cables, but I think this is just a suggestion because I couldn't fit mine like this. I'll show you why. The instructions show put in the ESC on this side and then routing the cables down the middle, but the cables weren't long enough on my ESC, and so I've had to stick the ESC on that side. Also the switch is different, so that's just plonked on top. But I have used the plastic box which will protect the receiver a little bit. It's not waterproof though, so beware of that. And at a later date I'll be fitting this ESC70 from ISDT, which is a Bluetooth programmable ESC. Step 41 is attaching the bumpers. So I think this is the front one. We've got part E3 and E1. We're just going to put that together like that. It's just 3 3x15s in these holes here. So that's that hole, and that hole there. Just get those screwed up first. And when that's done, turn it over and you've got your 3mm nuts. Again, they're captive, 1 in each side. and then slide that assembly into the frame rails at the front, then an 8mm machine screw and a spring washer, and screw them into each side, one for each of those captive nuts. Rear bumper is this part E2, and then get two 20mm screws, one through each of the holes, and then screw on the end MD8 ball joint onto each one, so it should look like that. And then very strangely it just clips in the back, so I think we slide it in, push it in, pull down this piece of plastic, and those ball joints locate in the holes underneath. Very strange. Step 42 is simply putting the tyres on the wheels. All four are the same, so it's exactly the same procedure. Basically just force the tyre over the rim, make sure it's seated correctly all the way around, and then go to the other side and just pull the bead into the rim. Again, you see quite easily when it's properly seated. It does show applying some instant cement to glue the rubber to the actual wheel itself, but I don't think this is going to need any. It's quite a tight fit, but if it does start slipping, I can always add some glue later. I'm going to finish up this build guide on step 43, which is attaching the wheels. They all go on exactly the same, apart from you need to put the outer bearings or bushings into the front wheels or over the front wheel axles. So get your bearing or bushing, just push it into place. Should go in quite easily. Your 2x10 pin just goes through the hole in the axle, and then it's plastic hex part C10, and that needs to fit onto the axle and locate on that pin. Pop a wheel on, and then there's a 4mm lock nut, and all of the wheels are the same, apart from at the back you don't need to put those bearings in. So here it is finished. Well, I'm calling it finished anyway. One complete CC02 chassis, and what a pleasure it was to build. Some fiddly bits along the way, but overall all went together rather nicely, and I think this is going to be a bit of a good runner out on the trails. You might notice the one thing I haven't done is I haven't put the body posts on, because I might be looking at a different way of mounting the body. We'll see as we go with that, but otherwise I think I've covered most of the parts of the build that you'll need to follow along with, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed the build, and I hope to see you on the next one where we'll be getting the bodywork done. Bye.